Hey everybody, Coach Toolshed here, and in today's video, I want to discuss some of the news that happened today and how this relates in general to the broader gaming marketing structure that we see going on time and time again throughout the industry. And if you haven't heard the news, unfortunately, I have to be the bearer of bad news for some people. I'm sure many of you already know, but several hours ago, CD Projekt did announce that Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be getting delayed until September of 2020. That's going to be the new release window, and we'll see where it goes from there. But see, the situation that I want to discuss is not me. I'm not going to start ranting and raving about them moving the release date back because, you see, in many ways, this is a very predictable occurrence. And I want to discuss the reaction that you see online to this sort of thing because it's a common cycle that we see over and over again. And we always get the same two reactions from segments of the fan base. And unfortunately, a lot of times, I know this is going to sound a little bit cynical, but a lot of times, these people, both groups, are very much incorrect, and I'm going to discuss that today. Now, obviously, you're always going to have some games every year, and it seems like it's more and more every year, but there's always going to be games that don't meet their release window. They get pushed back, they get delayed. There's all sorts of different reasons for that. Sometimes there's legitimate delays, and that's completely understandable. In game development, you're going to have certain setbacks. There's all sorts of different things that can go wrong. Sometimes studios have to do entire rewrites of their script. They have to scrap certain parts of the engine that just aren't working. They have to maybe, rewrite entire segments of the code to make something work that wasn't working the entire time. You never know what happens. Sometimes they even have to switch engines during development. I mean, sometimes major catastrophes go wrong. You see, sometimes entire studios get pushed off of projects and have to get it handed off to another studio altogether. So anything can go wrong in the world of video game development, and I understand that, and I think most people watching channels like enthusiast channels like this, I think most of us understand that. Now, obviously, one of the reactions you always get is you get people who get really upset, that threaten that they're not going to buy the game, they're not going to support the developer, they're not going to go out, they're going to cancel their pre-order. I don't know why you're pre-ordering anyway, but you get all the people who get really upset. I've been looking forward to this game for 5 years, blah, 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 and they get all upset. And I don't understand why, at this point, people don't understand that you can't trust an initial release date for any of these major games. Now, if a game actually launches on the date that is promised, that's the exception rather than the rule. You have to expect delays for these major titles, especially from certain companies, and I want to get into that in just a little bit. One of the other major reactions you get is the segment of people who will sit there and try to quote Shigeru Miyamoto when he's like, "A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad." You see that all the time. You see 1,000 tweets where people put that and they think they're all just, dispensing sage wisdom. And while it is a wise quote, yes, I understand that it's so overused at this point, but you'll see that segment of the population that says that, this is a great thing. Now they can finish the game. They're gonna release the game. They have time to polish it and whatnot. And then what happens? A lot of times anyway, these games come out and they're not actually all that polished. Now, some of the studios I'm going to discuss today actually do release finished polished games, but there is also many times where we see these delays and the games come out after getting delayed for over a year and they're still broken and buggy messes. So while sometimes delays can be good and fine and, like I said earlier, totally legitimate, other times things start to get a little bit suspicious, especially when certain companies and certain developers have a track record that you can go back and look at where they kind of do the same thing every time a major game releases. And unfortunately, it looks like CD Projekt is going down that path again because this is the same thing, don't forget, that they did with The Witcher 3. And we see this all the time from major studios like Rockstar Games as well. They have a track record going back over their past few releases where they'll give us a release date for the game, and then right before the game's about to come out, it's got to get pushed back 6 more months. And then when that 6 months comes into focus, we got to push it back another half a year, and then the game ends up launching about a year after their original release date. Another studio that does this is Naughty Dog. They do this all the time with their games, and we saw last year, comically, they announced the release date for The Last of Us 2, and almost immediately, within just a couple of weeks, they announced, no, that date's wrong. We got to push it back a few more months. It's like, okay. Now, sometimes there are situations where you might say a company try to make an announcement near the end of a fiscal quarter to try to bump up some of their stock value near the end of a fiscal quarter so they get good earnings report for that yearly quarter. If they make an announcement for the game, people get excited, they start getting into the news, investors can get excited, and they can start throwing more money into the company. Sometimes you see that. That's a little bit cynical way to look at it, but in the world of big business, things are cynical. That's kind of the way you need to look at it, because they're not looking at it like enthusiasts. They're looking at it in a business manner when it comes to how they make these announcements. Now, the other thing you can say is, in line with what the second group of people would say, oh, well, they're just, these are real delays, and they're going to just make the game better. They're going to make the game polished so that way it launches, it's going to be perfect. Now, for a studio like Naughty Dog, I will admit, generally speaking, they don't really have a problem with having really buggy games. Whether not you like their games or not, they don't really have a track record with releasing terribly buggy games. That's just not how they do it. Rockstar games, kind of the opposite thing. They are kind of known for having a lot of bugs in their games. And a lot of people like to forget, because Witcher 3 is, many people's game of the generation, and I understand that. But The Witcher 3, especially on consoles, did not launch in a very good spot at all. Broken quest givers. Many people, after one of the bigger patches early on, kind of had to start the game entirely over. I was one of them. I was 30 hours into the game, had to start the game entirely over because there were broken main quest givers. There was major frame rate issues and stuff. So even though there were a lot of delays announced for The Witcher 3 as well, they follow sort of the Rockstar system of here's the release date, now we're pushing it back 6 months, now we're pushing it back again. Same thing, but that game didn't really launch in a great state either. So my point in all this is, we can sit here and quote Miyamoto all day, and that's well and good, but the fact remains that just because a game gets delayed, that still doesn't guarantee that it's going to get launched in the greatest of states. Now, can a delay help? Certainly, and am I saying that, oh, they're just delaying and they're not actually working on the game? No, I'm sure they're still working on bugs and stuff like that, but my point is this. When certain companies do this, what's actually trying to do, and again, this is going to be a cynical ploy, but again, when we're talking about business strategies and when it comes down to brass tacks of actually trying to make the most money possible, what goes on is this. I'm going to make an analogy. I used to have a roommate who owned an American Bulldog, and if you don't know what they look like, go look up American Bulldogs. They are like 100 pounds of just sheer muscle, but they got these gigantic jowls that hang down from their mouth, and they're just absolute drool machines, especially when it's feeding time. Now, my roommate didn't really train his dog all that well. The thing was kind of reckless, but one thing he did train it to do was not to eat food out of people's hands until it was given to him. And he would sometimes sit there and hold the little ball of meat in front of the dog, and this thing, it would start drooling all over the floor to a ridiculous degree. And the longer he held the meat, the more drool would just puddle up. And I know this is disgusting, but my point is this. When it comes to marketing these games, they want us to be sitting here and just drooling all over the floor. And they're leading you around with this release date, which many times is not accurate from the get-go. Now again, I'm not saying that there's no such thing as a legitimate delay. Certainly there's situations that we can point to where it looks like some of the delays could have been legit. So for example, Final Fantasy VII Remake has been delayed several times, but Square Enix always seems to have problems with development like that. We know that Final Fantasy VII had major development problems, and I believe they got an entire new studio getting put onto the project at some point. They pushed the old studio that was working on it off the project entirely, and when stuff like that happens, obviously that's going to delay the product. But now we had a situation where just earlier this week they announced that the game's getting pushed back into April, when the game was really supposed to launch here in just about 6 weeks. And you got to look and be like, well, is this just a chance for them to build a little more marketing hype? Because we know what happens with the news cycles. The news cycles go so fast these days. 24 hours and you're out the door. So the more times you can put your name in front of people, the more likely you're going to have a big splash on release date. Because see, these companies aren't necessarily marketing to us, people who watch it, enthusiasts, people who are sitting here watching YouTube videos. They're trying to get this news out to people who are more casual. So the more times they can lead with headlines throughout the marketing cycle, the more people they'll get excited for the game who generally don't really know much about games. For example, I work with a guy at work right now, and he doesn't even own his own console system. He doesn't play on PC or anything like that. He doesn't really play games at all, except someone using someone else's system. So he's not really in tune. But he certainly got excited about The Witcher, playing The Witcher, when he heard about the Netflix series, because he got into popular culture, and now he's what's Cyberpunk? What's going on with that? Now this is someone who would have no idea about this except for finally, a certain specific turn of the news cycle pushed this into the forefront. I mean, we all know how generally people consume news these days. They just scroll through headlines on their phone, and that's how they absorb most of their news. So it's very easy for a game announcement, even a major game announcement, stuff that we all would know about. It's very easy for stuff like that to slide under the radar. So it's very important for these companies to get these names out, especially for these big name titles, these home run hitters, these games that the developers can pretty much bank on earning at least $500 million of revenue. And that's what we're talking here. I'm talking about these major releases. Final Fantasy VII Remake, Last of Us 2, back a couple years ago, Red Dead Redemption 2, Cyberpunk 2077. I mean, that game's going to sell incredible amounts of units. Now, this delay, in the end of the day, is not really going to matter. It's not going to affect their sales at the end of the day, and they know that. And in fact, it's going to affect them most likely in a very positive way, because now they have the entire news cycle to themselves today. It's a very slow time of year. There's no releases coming out at all right now, and now even the releases that were supposed to come out in a couple months, big ones, keep getting pushed back, and at some point, you got to get a little bit suspicious, because it keeps happening with the same companies over and over again. Now, my point to all this is really quite simple. Basically, until you actually have the game in your hand and you got the controller or your mouse and keyboard and you're playing the game, don't buy into these release dates. Don't buy into the hype. I'm not upset by this announcement at all, and I'm also not sitting here like, oh, thank you CD Projekt Red for delaying it. I know it's going to be even better now. I really have no reaction to stuff like this, because I've learned over the years that until the game is out, it's not out. It's just theoretical. Look at stuff like The Last Guardian, where an entire generation of consoles went from when they announced it to when it actually came out. It skipped an entire generation. So just don't get sucked into the hype. I know it's really easy to do, and people get all excited. And I know many of you were excited for CD Projekt Red next game, Cyberpunk 2077. And it's not coming out now for the better part of a year. And I know that sucks for a lot of people, but this is why I keep saying, and I keep preaching this, and I know it gets boring after a while, but I keep saying, don't buy into the marketing hype for these companies, because it makes no sense to do so. And we've seen so many examples over the years of people keep being let down and getting all upset about release dates, and it's nonsensical to think that way at this point. Don't buy into the hype. You can be excited and look forward to it, but just know it's going to be out when it's out. That's the whole point of this video. Okay, now again, I'll say, the fourth time I said that. I'm not saying that some of these aren't legit. But don't you gotta kind of get suspicious at some point when it keeps happening? That it's just marketing. Anyway, that's it for me, Coach Toolshed. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people that disagree with me. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Please subscribe. If you want to stay in tune with the channel, headed forward. And as always, keep it turned to 11.